Okay, this is going to be really weird. It's going to be weird. I'm just doing a child's check. I think you're all old enough to hear this. All the young ones here. Good. Okay. This is a ghost story, but it's not the usual kind. And this is my ghost story about ghosts who have been haunting me for a really long time. Like many ghost stories, this one involves murder and violence and pain, but also beauty and grace. This story involves violent and painful, real human history. And so I'm glad to see parents with the young people because you can go and research more and talk more. And I'm very happy to offer sessions and workshops for any of you or talks for any of you who want to know more about this history. This will raise perhaps a lot of questions for all of us. So buckle up, happy Halloween, and here we go. When I was a little girl, I started watching the show Bewitched. My dad was in television advertising, so we actually watched a lot of television when I was a kid. And Bewitched quickly became my favorite, and Endora was my favorite character. I really wasn't interested in Samantha. You might remember Samantha, who hid her magical powers in order to be married to a boring doofus named Darren. So I was on Team Endora, her mom, who would derisively refer to Darren as Durwood, and was really just irritated by her daughter's refusal to use magic because her husband forbade it. I would wonder, why would you not be a witch? Why wouldn't you use your magic? And I now recognize that was a latent feminist awareness in my own thinking, as I also was frustrated by a woman hiding and diminishing her own power in order to conform to suburban expectations of wives and mothers. There was an episode of Bewitched that was set in Salem. Some of you might remember. It featured an enchanted bed warmer or something like that, I think. I was probably in the second or third grade when it aired, and at the time, I'd begun reading everything I could find in my school and public library about the paranormal activity, and poltergeists, and ESP, and everything. So I was out one afternoon with my dad, probably doing errands, and telling him I really wanted to go to Salem, Massachusetts. We lived at the time in Connecticut. Actually, we always lived in Connecticut. And I said to my dad, can we go to Salem? And he said, oh yeah, it's not that far. We could drive up some weekend. But he said, honey, I want you to know that the thing about witches in Salem, Massachusetts, history is very upsetting. It's actually not fun, and it's not really Bewitched, doesn't show you anything about it. But I want you to know the story that these people were accusing each other of witchcraft, and a lot of them died. They were hanged. And I had heard references to Salem witch trials, but I didn't know what had happened. I'm going to take off this earring, which is banging against my mic, pardon me. They should have never let women into the pulpit, right? Just kidding. So I listened to my dad tell this story, and I said to him, ooh, they were hanged? And he, thinking that I was having trouble processing this information, said, yes, honey, they were hanged because people thought that they were real witches. And I said, I remember being burned. I don't remember saying this. I don't remember this conversation. My father remembered it. He never forgot it. And he was very disturbed by it. According to him, he asked me, what did you just say? You remember what? What did you mean by that? And I said, by what? That is, I made the statement while seeming to be deep in thought, remembering something from long ago. And when he said, what? What did you mean by that? And I said, by what? It means that I must have blanked out somehow or disassociated for a moment. He didn't press me then, but he carried that conversation with him and asked me about it much later. And I didn't have an answer for him then either. I said, wait, what did I say? So we went back over this memory, and he said, no, this happened. You were really little. I didn't want to say anything about it for a long time until you were old enough to talk about it. What do you think you meant? And I said, I don't know. And we just looked at each other. And we just respected that something had happened that day that I made the remark, and that my obsessive interest in witches, not just in magical powers, but in the archetypal figure of the witch throughout history, had very personal and mysterious origins in me. I started calling myself a witch in the 3rd grade. And of course, my peers teased me mercilessly, but I had my reasons. And my confidence in claiming that identity has not wavered yet, even though I went on in life to claim more labels and identities, of course. I went on to study everything I could get my hands on about the Salem witch trials, an episode in early American history that still grips our collective interest. And I always spent some time this time of year at the memorial to the victims of the 1692 hysteria. I have friends who are descendants of those who died in the hysteria, who were hanged, and in one case pressed to death, and some died in prison. I put flowers on the markers for those friends. I was actually very sobered when I researched my predecessors in the pulpit of First Parish Church in Norwell to learn that one of my 17th century predecessors, Diodate Lawson, was fired by the congregation for long absences from the parish, and it turns out when he was gone for months at a time, I looked at the dates, and it corresponded exactly with what was happening up here in Salem, and he was involved in the witch trials. But I found out that he became concerned about the way the situation spiraled out of control with such dreadful outcomes. And I thought, what a burden for all of those who watched what was happening and felt that it was horrifying. A word about what happened in Salem that is relevant to our times. It's easy for us to poo-poo the worldview of the 17th century Puritans who got caught up in accusations of satanic visitations and pacts with the devil and witchcraft. We should not be so judgmental as all that, however, as we consider the kinds of ridiculous, petty, vengeful, and destructive behaviors that persist between suspicious neighbors yet today. Add a little belief in the supernatural to that, and you can imagine how it can get out of hand. And there is no faster or more effective way to whip any group of respectable adults into a frenzy than to threaten their children. And all of the witch hysteria in Salem began, you may remember, with a group of teenage girls having fits and mysterious ailments and seizures and screaming and carrying on that the devil was flying around and so on. Human nature hasn't changed all that much. In 1989, moving beyond my childhood, I was a new college graduate and a high school English teacher in Chicago. I was a New Age Wiccan, and I had an altar in my apartment with crystals and a wand and a ritual athame on it. I had been studying tarot for a few years. I worked with herbs and worked benevolent spells by the phases of the moon. I followed the witch's rede or rule, which is, "And ye harm none, do what ye will." I understood working spells as simply doing energy work and setting intentions, and I was very careful not to manipulate anyone else's free will by my energy work. In one of my books, I think it was Marion Weinstein's book, Practical Magic, I saw a reference to a 15th century guide to interrogating witches called the Malleus Maleficarum. It was a hand guide written by two Catholic priests meant to guide inquisitors in their work, if you will, a terrible, terrible, and terrifying document. I decided to find a copy of the whole thing. And when I did find it and read it, I learned something I hadn't known before, which is that there was a centuries-long persecution across a wide swath of Europe of women accused of being witches, tortured to coerce confessions of guilt, and killed by burning at the stake. I say women because this is mostly women's history. Among the hundreds of thousands of victims of the burning times in Europe, which is roughly 1350 to 1750, about 85% of the victims were women and girls. In some cases, a few villages had their entire female population murdered and wiped out in this way. When I read, I know, take a breath. Yeah, it's intense. And it needs to be taught. When I read the Malleus Maleficarum and this history that I had not known before, my body broke out into hives. I mean bad hives, huge red welts and wheezing, and I had to be sent to the hospital in an ambulance. My doctor could not come up with an explanation. And at the time, I didn't make the connection at all. I don't know when I remembered my childhood recollection. I remember being burned. So I want to ask you at this juncture, while you're absorbing this, to think about a time when your own body and soul may have known something that your mind did not, or did not yet know, or that your society told you could not be true or real. And I want you to recall that and recall what Emerson just said about the truth and the soul, that we know some things that we know because of the soul that is one throughout time and space. Part of what was killed during that, what feminist historians call the burning times, was that way of knowing. Non-rational, not provable, intuitive, embodied, personal. You can see how this way of knowing would be maddening to men who were obsessed with coalescing power and knowledge through the church and doctrine, and later, not much later, through the scientific method that excluded women from its study and practice. And I think that's the secondary horror story. So flushes, rashes, voices, dreams, a bird coming to the window, a personally important song playing at an improbable moment that seems to convey a message. Do you trust these sources of wisdom? One of the great honors of being a minister is that I get to hear about the strange portents that the culture has taught us all to regard as just coincidence or just a weird thing. But you who experience this moment or encounter the dream, or on an intuitive level that there's no just about it. And I want you to trust those instincts. There is a kind of violence in dismissing mystical experiences by saying, oh, I'm sure that could be explained. Do you know that Francis Bacon, the father of the scientific method of inquiry, said that the goal of science was, and I'm quoting him, to tease and torture the secrets out of nature, and ultimately, quote, to control and manipulate it. Sir Francis lived during the witch hysteria in Europe, and he would have known exactly what kinds of images he was evoking with his remark about teasing and torturing the secrets out of nature, which, as you know, throughout Western history has been gendered as female. As the scientific revolution developed, so were women healers and midwives accused of witchcraft and brutally eliminated. Midwives and herbalists were very commonly the first in a community to be accused of witchcraft, Women were therefore terrorized out of the medical profession. So now I'll bring you to 1989 when I go off on a backpacking trip to Europe and I land in Amsterdam for a few days. I get to see amazing art and lots of cool stuff, and I love the city with its canals and its relaxed vibe. And I see a poster for an exhibit that has a torture device on it. And I should know better because I've just been through this whole hives event. You know, I should know not to go there, but I think, oh God, this is cool. This is an exhibit being sponsored by Amnesty International of torture devices. Why don't I go? Oh, okay, that's brilliant. So I go to this exhibit, which is displaying things from the medieval era as well as modern day. And it's incredibly disturbing, but you know, I'm a scholar, I'm an intellectual person, right? I'm fine. And I keep walking around and I'm reading the little, explanation cards, and then I faint. I just drop, which has never happened. I don't faint. Some nice people, young people, help me up, and they insist on walking me back to my hotel, and somehow I get up to my little room on the 3rd floor of the hotel, the B&B, and I lose a few days. I remember looking down on myself from the ceiling and seeing myself in this little tiny bed. That's really all I remember. I don't eat. I don't go anywhere. The nice lady owner knocks on my door. It's like, "Are you okay, dear? Do you want anything?" I say, "No, I'm okay." And she probably assumes I'm having a drug experience, because it's Amsterdam, which is known for that. After a couple of days of just being out of it, out of myself, I get out of bed and I leave Amsterdam. And I kind of tuck that experience away. And I think, my God, I don't know, is this a past life? Is this, I don't know, it's just a something. It's a something. And it's serious. And I've been beckoned, I realize, by those who died in this insane and horrifying time. And I've been asked by them to tell their story and to know about it. So I have done that ever since. I've been studying the period. I've read hundreds of trial transcripts from those terrible trials. I have felt obligated to talk about witches this time of year and to ask people, do you know the origins of those hags that are hanging on people's porches with the pointed hats of wisdom? And do you know their origins in actual history? Have you considered what you are doing when you dress up your little girls as terrifying witches with the hooked nose, the sunken cheeks, the hairy chin? All of those facial features are just things that happen to women post-menopause. They're happening to me. My nose is starting to lose some of its structure, and it's starting to hook a little bit. And when you didn't have good dental care, your teeth disappeared and your cheeks sank in. And of course, we all know about the hairs on the chin. I'm always plucking them. That's where that comes from. It's fear and demonization of women, and especially older women, post-childbearing years, worthless by society. The church's intentional demonization and murder of hundreds of thousands of women who were mostly wholly innocent of any kind of wrongdoing whatsoever. They went to the stake because they were sexually threatening to men or to women, or because they provided herbs that were intended to ease the pain of childbirth or menstrual cycles, because those things, that pain was God's punishment of Eve, punishment of Eve's for committing the sin in the Garden of Eden. You can't relieve women's pain. They were accused and tortured because they were mouthy to their husbands or to someone in power, or because they reported a rape. They were accused and tortured and sent to the stake because they resisted being married off to someone they found repulsive, or because they were found kissing another woman. The husbands who tried to defend them died with them. It was a war on women, a time when the courts of both the Catholic and the Protestant Reformation authorities presided over a reign of terror. I am wearing a Geneva robe this morning very intentionally because this is the garment worn by many of the clergy who presided over these trials. This garment represented the learned ministry of the Protestant Reformation. And torturing supposed witches is part of what many of those men considered to be an expression of moral righteousness. So 2 years ago, I'm in Paris. Hadn't planned to be, but I took a brief stop on my way home from Israel. One day I was just meandering around and I thought, well, I should probably start looking for a restroom at some point. And I'm in a neighborhood, I'm kind of lost, but I don't care, it's Paris. And I see this museum, it's kind of boring looking. It turns out to be the Museum of Archives. This is not something that really interests me, Paris archives. But I'm like, oh, it's pretty architecture, I'll go in. And I go in and I pay my fee and I say, where's the restroom? And they say, it's that way. And I just decide, oh, you know what, I'm here. Why don't I just walk up the stairs? I walk up this long staircase, marble, and I'm at the top, I'm looking around, and there are all these images of women, like in advertising, sort of sex goddesses and dangerous-looking, witchy kind of women, and I'm like, what is this? It's a Museum of Paris Archives, and I don't read French, really, so I'm just peering, and I'm going along, and I'm walking, and I'm like, what is this? Okay, and I walk in, and I'm walking to the next room, and I realize I have stumbled upon, an exhibit of archives related to the witch burning time in Europe. I have stumbled upon an entire gorgeously curated exhibit that actually allows me to see in human handwriting on the paper the original documents, because they were carefully preserved. These people who presided over these trials were very proud of the work they were doing. They were ridding the realm of Satan's minions. And I cannot believe it. And I go from case to case, and they've got so many of them. And I'm seeing in actual handwriting, I've read this transcript. Oh my God, I know this woman's situation. I remember this one. And many, many more. And the exhibit goes on, and I think, oh, wow, you guys got me here, didn't you? But this time, instead of fainting and dissociating, I'm just grateful. I'm just like, I'm here. I'm willing. I have no idea what's going on, but thank you for bringing me here. This is something, had I read about it, I would have flown to Paris just to see it, just to pay my respects to what is left of the victims of that horrible, horrible time. And I say to the dead, I've been speaking for you. I want you to know that. And I want you to know that my best girlfriend is a doctor. And I want you to know that I'm a minister and that the church has changed and that women have been a huge part of that. And that we are repentant and horrified, all decent people, by what was done to you, and we are still fighting abusers in the church. And I tell them about the liberation movements that honor their memory, as well as the lives of all those who have been victims of evil human inclinations. We live in more than one world at a time. I think that we are. We may be living in more than one time at a time. At this magical time of year, when the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead is said to be the thinnest, when those who are open to it may receive invitations or beckonings from mysterious presences or the ancestors, I urge you to consider what has been given to us by our rationalist tradition, but also to consider what has been taken from us. The goddess is alive and magic is afoot, we used to say in my Wiccan community. It has always been so, and may have something profound to reveal and to teach. Thank you for going on this weird journey with me.